Greetings, George Wilson fans. Anybody that collects comic books or read them in the 60s, the 70s, and paperback books in the 80s and the 90s either knows the name George Wilson or remembers the covers that George Wilson did. George Wilson was, I think, and that's the reason I did this book, one of the preeminent artists of painted comic book covers. He also did book covers, as I said, during the Silver Age. He started doing book covers in the mid-50s, comic book covers. For instance, he did The Time Machine, the Classics Illustrated Time Machine. He also did the Dell comic book. He did one of the Dell comic book Steve Canyon covers, and they're all covered in this book. But this book is a complete survey of the work of George Wilson. It's the first ever book, and it is very comprehensive. It has an excellent introduction by Joe Jusko, who is a very well-known artist of paperback books, illustrations, and comic books. And Joe is, I think it would be fair to say, he was on our panel at Comic-Con last year, a huge fan of George Wilson, and he assisted us in this book, going through many of the paintings that we had to make sure they were done by George Wilson. You see, George Wilson didn't sign his comic book work. Now, when he was doing paperback books and romance books later on in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, for instance, he did Flash Gordon. He did the Flash Gordon book covers. He did covers for the Avon Phantom. He also did covers for Harlequin Romance and other companies. He did war covers. He did colonial war covers. He did romance covers. He did Western covers. But let's get back to comic books. He's best known for the absolutely fantastic comic book covers he did. He did the first issue covers for Magnus Robot Fighter. He did a lot of the really interesting Dark Shadows covers. He also did a lot of covers for Dr. Solar. He did not do the first Dr. Solar covers. Covers 1 through 3 were done by paperback book artists. He did the 4th and 5th covers. And they're in this book, actually. We have the original art from those books. He also did a lot of work on the Gold Key Phantom. He did some of the absolute best covers for the Gold Key Phantom. And as I said, he also did the painted covers for the Avon paperback books, which Hermes Press published. So if you have, he did Turok, Son of Stone. He did Tarzan. Let's look at the book. Let's look at the book. Here's the cover. And you'll notice on the cover, from your right to the left, we have the cover for Phantom #1, the Gold Key Phantom #1. We have the Space Family Robinson cover, and we have the Classics Illustrated. This is the original art, incidentally. And the original cover art for the Classics Illustrated Time Machine. Going down, we have a Turok, Son of Stone cover, and a really phenomenal Dark Shadows cover, and then the cover to Dr. Solar 4, which could be a movie poster. In fact, many of the covers he did could double as movie posters. They're that good. The essay in this book was written by Anthony Taylor, and Anthony Taylor is a very talented pop culture journalist. He wrote another book for us. It was The Future Was Fab, The Art of Mike Trim, which we came out with in 2006. It's hard to believe it was that long ago. It's a fantastic book. If you like Thunderbirds and you like Jerry and Sylvia Anderson, that's an incredible book, but I digress. Anyway, back to George Wilson. In this book, for instance, one of the illustrations in the cover obviously is in the book. You'll notice that we have the artboard with the notations on it. In designing this book, I felt that comic art fans would want to see all of the art. However, that gets kind of boring, so we cropped off some of the edges and the borders. Here's a Dr. Solar cover. That's the original art to a Dr. Solar cover. And now we have, this is one of his book covers. And the other cover is a Boris Karloff cover. And then we have a Star Trek cover. He did a lot of Star Trek covers. And then the other cover is from a paperback book. Then we have Joe Jusko's essay where he's discussing George Wilson. And that's a cover from Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes. and it's one of Joe's favorite covers. We have other favorite covers, and there's the art for the Dr. Solar cover painting. And there's more. Now, there's an introduction written by yours truly with a really phenomenal cover to a comic book that only ran one issue. And then, as you may or may not know, George Wilson did dozens of covers for the Twilight Zone. And here's a very interesting cover because you'll notice the face in the middle. That's George Wilson. He painted himself into the book. Now, George Wilson, during the Second World War, worked for the Ghost Army, and the Ghost Army was a top-secret unit of the Army that made blow-up tanks and guns and things like that to fool the enemy into thinking that we were where we were when we weren't there. And so Anthony covers this. This is a portrait done of George Wilson by a friend of his. And then we get into some more art. There's the Time Machine, and there's the Steve Canyon cover. But there's more. There's a lot in here, actually. In addition, this is I'm thumbing through the introduction, and there's the last known picture of George Wilson. Now, George Wilson unfortunately passed away in 1998. He was 77 years old, and he was working up until the day he died. Here is one of my favorite covers. I'm a big fan of the Time Tunnel, and this is the cover to Time Tunnel #1. It's the original art. It's oil on board. And then here is the cover for Dr. Solar 4, that's the first cover where Dr. Solar dons his Dr. Solar superhero duds. Before that, he just had the dark glasses and a kind of smock that you wear when you're a scientist. And there are more Dr. Solar covers. And let's move on. We have Space Family Robinson. He did the covers he did Space Family Robinson. Now here's the Space Family Robinson #1 cover. And we have a lot of the original art from the covers he did for Space Family Robinson. Of course, the Phantom, since Hermes Press is the home of the Phantom reprints. There are two more really phenomenal Phantom covers. You notice the guy going to hit the Phantom with his gun. That's George Wilson. He put himself in these. And then here's a really phenomenal cover. So we have that. And then, as a specialty piece for one of the great Phantom fans of P. Kloss, he did this original, which we then used for the reprint of the Gold Key Phantom on the cover. But there's just so much more. There's Magnus, Robot Fighter, and not to mention all the other covers he did. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, for instance. Look at those covers. And we have one of the original covers. There we go. There's the original for that. And you'll notice this book is very well put together. It's got a beautiful spine. It's got the back of the book has a Twilight Zone cover. It's kind of nifty. He did a lot of the covers that he did that were surreal, or in many respects a little more interesting and not as predictable as the superhero covers that he did. And here's Mighty Samson fighting a tree with a whole lot of eyes. Very, very creepy. And here he is with the Chrysler Building. It's kind of like After the Planet of the Apes, but there were no apes. He was just fighting creatures and things like that. And then we have Star Trek covers. I like the one eye. That's a nice touch. I think he's going to eat Spock and Kirk, and I don't think they would be very tasty. And then we have Mars Patrol Total War with the header. And of course, since we're big fans of Jerry and Sylvia Anderson, we have a painted cover for Supercar and Fireball XL5. And then, of course, no book on George Wilson would be complete without his Flash Gordon covers. And here's a really kind of neat cover. It's an adaptation of the Man with the X-Ray Eyes. It's at the top there. Not to forget, he did the one issue of Jet Dream. And we won't get into that name, but Jet Dream was a backup in the Man from U.N.C.L.E. comic books that were done, and he didn't do any of the covers for the Man from U.N.C.L.E. They were photo covers. But he did. They did. Mike Sikowski did the interior art for most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And they had a one-shot Jet Dream, and he did the cover. And then, of course, we have the fantasy. This is broken down by genre. So then you have the Turok Son of Stone covers. In fact, I won't say who it is because I don't want people to bother him, but we have the cover to the first Turok Son of Stone cover. It's Turok Son of Stone 30. It's the first gold key issue from 1962, and this is in a private collection. And the owner was nice enough to take it out of the frame. And here's one of my favorite covers. You have a nice dinosaur getting ready to eat our hero. He wouldn't be tasty. Besides, he likes to shoot these things with arrows. I wouldn't try to eat him. It's not going to be very tasty. Then you have our Tarzan covers. We have Dell Tarzan covers, gold key Tarzan covers. Here's an original. Now, a lot of these covers came from one particular individual who specializes in collecting George Wilson. And we went down to his home. He was very nice and allowed us to scan a lot of these images from his collection. We got these from different collectors. A lot of these have been in auctions. We got a lot of these from the people that bought them in the auction. So these come from a lot of different sources. Here's what I consider to be one of the really interesting surreal covers for the Twilight Zone. Isn't that interesting? And guess what? That's George Wilson again. And then we have more Twilight Zone covers. But I don't want to give the whole book away. Let's just say that it covers his comic book work with a great deal of, in great detail. We have the paperback book covers, and that's a model sheet. More paperback book covers. I don't want to show you the whole book because you got to buy it. We have a section on Westerns. That's a cover for the OK Corral. It's interesting because if you look at the cover to the book, which we didn't put in here, this is the original painting. They added in a horse on the left-hand side of the art on the published book cover. So it's slightly different from this cover. And, of course, you can't have a Western without having the Lone Ranger. Okay, so we have Westerns and we have romance. And here's some romance covers. Very romantic. And we end with interviews. An interview was conducted with George Wilson by Pete Kloss. Here it is. Let me see here. A conversation over lunch spans a career. And this was conducted, let me see. I'm trying to remember here. I know Pete Kloss conducted the interview. We're happy to present the interview with Kloss's permission. And Ed Rhodes, Pete Kloss and Ed Rhodes. Unfortunately, Ed Rhodes passed away. They were both, I think, two of the most noteworthy and enthusiastic Phantom fans in the world. And that doesn't put anybody down that loves the Phantom. These two gentlemen really tried to document the Phantom, which included the only known interview that I'm aware of with George Wilson, which is reprinted in this book. And then Anthony Taylor interviews a number of artists who were influenced by George Wilson. We have a checklist of his comic books. We have a checklist of his paperback books and illustrations. And now the end leaves of this book, or end papers, are kind of interesting. They're flood colors, but they have one of the pieces of art that the opacity has been turned down on so you can see it shining through the color. And we have really beautiful end leaves in this book, as you can see. Those are the front end leaves. These are the back end leaves. So a lot of people have been waiting for this book. And it was just printed and we just got advances. And a lot of people are concerned about getting this book because of the recent Diamond bankruptcy. However, Diamond's been purchased by a larger company, and it appears that Diamond will continue to distribute comic books and books in the trade and in comic book stores. However, we have been approached by a number of comic book stores and bookstores to buy the book directly. And good news, if you want to buy the book from us directly, we can sell it to you. Now, I will tell you this. The order on this book has been very aggressive. We've had really good orders on this book. And if you can see from what I've just showed you, this is a really phenomenal book. I think this book really presents George Wilson in all of his glory and shows a number of his really phenomenal comic books from the original artwork. We do have some comic books in here for variety, the actual comic book covers, because we couldn't get the original art and we thought they were good covers. I designed this book and I spent quite a lot of time putting it together, going through all of the different covers, selecting ones that I thought were representative, making sure that the material in here was the best material we could find, making sure that the images were up to par in terms of being really representative and color corrected. This book has a foreword, an introduction, It has 7 chapters. The introduction, George Wilson, Ghost Artist, science fiction and superheroes, fantasy and adventure, mystery, suspense and occult, military and war, westerns, I'm not done too fast for you, am I? Romance and a conversation over lunch, which spans a career, and an appreciation, George Wilson as an inspiration. It has a checklist of the books, the comic books, and acknowledgments. This is a really comprehensive monograph on one of the absolute greatest cover artists in comic books and in the Silver Age. So it's available from us now. You can't get it because it's in shipment, but you can pre-order it. And my advice to you would be, if you want this book, order it, because my orders are so large that I was surprised. After I ordered the print run, after the book was printed, Diamond went into bankruptcy. We started to get all kinds of orders from independent bookstores and comic book stores because they were concerned they wouldn't get it. And the orders are phenomenal. It's a good thing. But I'm not going to reprint this book. And we printed a couple of thousand copies, and we're very close to selling out. So if you want this book and you order it from us, then you will get it before anybody else does. Just go on our website, www.hermespress.com. You order it from us. Your price is locked in, even though we have to pay 27.5% tariff when it comes through customs, which we did not expect. The price of this book is $75. We're not changing the book. That's the price we advertised it at. And if I had to print it today, and if I was soliciting it today, it would be more because of the tariff. Point being, if you buy it from us, you're going to get it from this price. You're going to get it. You're going to be guaranteed getting it. If you want this book and you're interested, buy it through our website. You can still buy it through Diamond. Diamond is still in business. The company that bought Diamond is going to keep them in business. And you can buy it through Diamond Book Division, which means you can get them through Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and the different book services. But again, because the order is so big on this book, and I was not surprised, I was actually very happy with it, we may not be able to supply all the orders from third parties. So if you want this book and you really want it, buy it through us. That's it. Any questions, email me at daniel@hermespress.com or info@hermespress.com. And that's it. Any questions, just get a hold of me or info. That's it for now. Bye-bye.